Welcome everyone to Rules Explained. In this episode, we're starting part 2 of Flames of War. We're starting over the turn sequence. I'm John Merritt.
And I'm Rob Nothing.
Let's get started. All right. Okay, we actually had the chance to play the game between last episode and this episode, and I think that's something we should really begin doing. Like before we talk about the games, actually play the game. I don't think we've actually quite done that a lot because it gave me a better sense as to how the game flows and moves, and different strategies and tactics to use within it.
Well, I don't think we should be too hard on ourselves because everything that we have reviewed, we have played. Now,
True.
It might have been, say, a couple of months or so, but you are right. I think what we're trying to suggest here to our audience, so they don't lose faith in us, is that if we played a game like right before we do one of these videos,
yes,
that would remind us of some of these tactical issues and some of these rules nuances that we may have forgotten about. So, yeah, we have played everything that we have reviewed. It's just a question of timing, I think, would be a little bit more productive.
Okay, so we left off, or actually we're starting with the turn sequence now. So we start with the starting steps. The starting steps is used to, I call it the tabletop cleanup. When you remount bailed out tanks, we'll talk about that later. You rally pinned down troops, we'll talk about that. You check for last stand, if there's any victory conditions, and so forth and so forth. Then we have the movement step, the shooting step, the assault step, and then the opponent's turn. Sounds like a lot. It goes pretty quick.
The starting step is perhaps the most complicated out of all of these things because you have multiple different things going on at once. And primarily, if you want to think about it this way, if you have just gotten yourself your feet wet in this game system, it's kind of like, just like you said, John, it's a clean up the battlefield, the markers, and so on and so forth. But from a tactical perspective, it's kind of a recovery and morale issue. Your troops have been beat up. Your troops have suffered from damage, from attacks, and so on and so forth. What can they do now? Are they going to succumb to that damage? Are they going to go ahead and rally or repair or whatever the case may be to continue on the fight? That's what really the starting step is all about.
Yes. So the movement. Oh, wow, that's interesting. They go from starting step to movement. Okay, so for the starting step, for each subphase of it, you go to that particular page and they talk to you about it. So like for a bailed out tank, that's a tank that's been hit but hasn't quite been destroyed. The crew is panicking. They're trying to put stuff back together. They call it bailed out. I mean, I don't think it's, they bailed out of the tank. I think they're quickly trying to patch the tank back together and get it working and mobile again.
Yes, thank you for that. I've disagreed with the name they use. The name bailed out just doesn't work for me. In Panzer Blitz and Panzer Leader, and other games, they use like disrupted or some other term to go ahead and describe the fact that you have a crew in various states of distress, whether it be they're putting out fires or they're trying, just like you said, to get the vehicle up and running again, or maybe they did actually leave the tank and then are trying to scramble back in. There's a variety of different things, but they just blanketed all one statement of bailed out, I think, was perhaps a slight error, but that's just my opinion.
And rally pinned down units. These are units which have been hit but haven't. If a unit gets, no, I shouldn't say unit. If a squad, what's a group of units? A group of teams. That's a squad, right?
Yes.
Okay,
No,
so if a squad gets hit, was it 5 times? They are pinned down. It doesn't mean they take 5 damage. They just get hit 5 times. They are then considered pinned down. And then when it's your turn, you have to roll to see if they're able to get back up again, or if they're still pinned down from the previous turn.
That is correct.
The last stand was interesting. We'll have to go over that later. But I'm sorry, what now?
I was just going to say pinned down does not necessarily mean you're out of the action, but that's something we can explain more details later.
Yes. The last stand, the victory conditions. Last stand, that was new to me. I wasn't ready for that. What was the unit last stand again? If you lost so many people
You
in your
have
squad?
right, you have a unit, and that unit consists of so many teams. And if you've lost a certain number of teams, that unit can be just like, okay, we give up, we're done. And they vacate the battlefield or they surrender if they're surrounded and so on and so forth. There's a lot of different factors to consider there that are not, part of the actual game. They're just, subsumed within the rules mechanics. But
Hmm.
suffice to say, you check for the unit to see if it goes away. And then if you've lost so many units, then your formation, which is composed of units, might just fall apart. And
And
generally
collapse.
speaking, yes, and generally speaking, if you lose a formation, you're pretty much out of the game because most players who are playing it just a quick game perhaps have just one formation.
Hmm. All right, let's move down to movement. So here we have our first. Actually, this is the first time they've actually shown stats
Yes.
within the game so far. So we have a tactical movement, we have a terrain dash, cross country dash, and a road dash.
Yep.
So your tactical movement is as much as you're able to move and fire. Is that
Yes.
correct?
That is
Your
correct.
terrain dash is the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. Terrain dash was what again?
If you use the movement of dash in any way, shape, or form, you're not going to be firing that turn.
Okay,
A dash is used to go ahead and get you fast across the battlefield.
that's right.
So a terrain dash is used whenever you're crossing any type of terrain. This game pretty much simplifies terrain as either passable or not passable. And if you're in a tank, you can pass through almost any terrain, but you got to make what is called a cross check, but that's for later. Suffice to say, you use your terrain dash if you're trying to move across that terrain at a faster speed. If you're moving over open terrain, then you use the cross country dash speed, which, as you can see in the example, is pretty darn quick. If you happen to be on a road, you're going to fly pretty fast. But again, any dash movement you cannot fire. So if you take a look at terrain dash, there's almost no advantage of doing that unless you're trying to dash into cover.
Yeah, I really like how they put in road dash. This is the first game I've seen where they've actually give bonuses to you being on a road, which I really like.
Yeah, most games will go ahead and say there's movement costs and say it costs 2 inches of movement to move through a terrain, or you get a bonus of 50% movement for being on a road. This game just says, nope, each vehicle has its own capabilities because it could be wheeled vehicles, half track vehicles, foot infantry, whatever. So each has got its own peculiar statistics for its ability to move cross terrain or over terrain or whatever the case may be. So I really like it too. I think it's a fantastic idea.
It is nice. And they have their mobility and movement chart. So if it's a standard tank, light, fast, slow, or very slow tank, you have your different movement values. Staying in command, out of command. I guess that's really actually quite important. Staying in command. You have to stay within 6 inches in order for commands to be relayed. You don't want to get out of formation.
Suffice to say, there are some minor penalties for being out of formation, but they're not severe. But they could cause you to, shall we say, not have the tactical flexibility that you want. So, yeah, staying in command is very good. And as we discovered in that game we played, there is a rule that if you're too close, that could be a disadvantage as well. So, there's all sorts of nuances to your positions. Stay in command, but don't get too close.
Moving through teams, moving through gaps, moving through terrain. This is where we talked about doing a cross check.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can see down here on the card it has a 3 plus. So anytime you want to go onto a terrain or through a terrain, you have to roll a d6 and get equal or greater than whatever the check is on a d6.
Yeah, it simulates a lot of different factors in the game, such as the weight of the vehicle, such as its rated maneuverability, such as its reported ability in history to go ahead and throw a tread if it went over certain terrains. This game kind of simplifies it as well. If you don't make a cross check, your tank just stops there. I think in earlier editions of the game, they actually had a bog rule, which would actually get your tank stuck. But I think they basically just said, no, that just adds a layer of complication. So your vehicle just stops at the edge of the train it was trying to cross, and it can try again next turn if it wants, or it can just give up and go around.
Okay, and then they give us a nice terrain chart. So depending upon the type of terrain you're using, whether it be grass or a field or a fence, it'll let you know if they require you to make a cross check. Also, if it's a bulletproof cover or not. And that's a factor as well.
This is a very useful chart, as it not only goes ahead and tells you what kind of speed you can use to cross it, but if you're using dash, I should say, but it also tells you if you need a cross check for it. Okay, for example, I don't need a cross check to go through some thin snow. Okay, it also tells you the height, which will be important for line of sight as well as cover considerations. And then, like you just said, bulletproof cover. That becomes important for infantry who have a chance to survive some of these more intense firepower if they happen to be behind some sort of bulletproof cover.
Then we move into mounting transports. I'll be real honest, I didn't read this. How do you transport passengers?
It's not that complicated, but it does, unless you have a special rule. And remember, this is a very familiar refrain to anybody who plays war games. There's always special rules that will supplant the base rule set. But the base rules say the following: the transport itself cannot move until the passengers are on board or until the passengers are disembarked. So in other words, you can't just fly around the battlefield and dump these guys off. The transport has to be stationary for them to board or to disembark. So as you can see in the example there, the half track is going to wait for that infantry team to board, two teams to board, and then it can go ahead and move. Okay? And then in the second example, and by the way, this rule book is well illustrated with photographs of what actually happened, and that's what I like about this a lot.
Yeah, agreed. It cleans up a lot of confusion.
Yes. And in the second example, you can see there the infantry teams have dismounted, and then the half track moves to another position. That is basically how you transport infantry.
All right, then
by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt. By the way, you can carry troops on tanks, just like we've seen in so many movies and newsreel footages. If you want to put a bunch of teams on, or I should say a team on a tank, they can go ahead and carry that. It's a little risky because they're totally exposed, but it could help get your infantry across the field quick.
I thought this was a neat one, shooting at passengers. I never really thought about doing that. How does that work?
Well, in essence, a group being transported is a target unless, for whatever reason, the vehicle has armor. Like, for example, a lot of your half tracks, they will go ahead and have armor, which means you have to actually shoot them like you would anything else. But everything has a chance of saving, so you still get your basic save. And if you make your basic save, your infantry teams bail out of the burning wreck and you go ahead and fight as usual. Okay. But needless to say, yes, you can target them, especially if they're soft vehicles. Now, I didn't see any trucks available in Flames of War, and maybe somebody can comment on this. I thought just your regular, deuce and a half or whatever. There's no regular trucks here. Everything's half tracks. I'd be very interested to see if the game will come out with some soft transport that'll make the game a little bit less, comfortable for infantry being transported.
Yeah. Okay, so there's movement orders where you're able to blitz. So the unit leader can issue a blitz move order in the movement step before the unit moves. If it does this, roll a die.
Yeah, each of those tactics is the generic tactics that any leader, and this is the advantage of being in your command radius, you get to receive these orders, you can issue these, and they all have varying effects and have varying opportunities depending on the text of the tactic. There are 3 of them listed here, but there are numerous available depending on your, I'm sorry, there's not just 3, I beg your pardon, there's 5, there's 2 more on the following page. But you also have some special ones based upon your army, whether it be Americans, Germans, or whatever the case may be. So there's opportunities for you to kind of make your game a little bit more interesting and add just a few more tactical options to your forces instead of just going ahead and move, shoot, move, shoot.
Right. So in order to do a special tactic, your HQ has to be alive.
Yeah.
So within your formation, you have one guy who is your commander. He has to be alive in order to issue the command. You can do a blitz move, a shoot and scoot, a dig in for your infantry or tanks, actually. I was kind of surprised that tanks could dig in, but I guess it's more of a metaphor. So like if a tank digs in, they're closing the hatchets, they're closing the windows, they're locking the doors.
And they're going with what's called hull down. What you're doing,
yes.
you're trying to use the terrain around you to minimize your profile, and to make it harder for the enemy to go ahead and pick you off.
So it's follow me and cross here. Shooting. So we've done our movement. We want to shoot at each other. We check for range, we check line of sight, and remember it's a WYSIWYG, so what you see is what you get. In order to have line of sight, get down, look at the end of the gun, see if you can see the opponent. Now, Rob had a good idea. What if it's partially covered? He said the rule of 2. You can see 2 tires, 2 feet,
Because if you go to the line of sight rules on page 28 there, if I remember exactly where it is, yes, there we go. If you go to page 28, it says no line of sight. This is the only rule that seems to me to be very vague. Line of sight can be blocked by tall terrain, no complaints there, including buildings and hills, and friendly teams other than stationary infantry teams. So you can't fire through your own tanks. A team cannot shoot at a target if all, and here's the problem with the rules, if all, or practically all, of the line of sight are blocked. And I'm like, okay, what do you mean practically all? And here's what if you look at their example, they have a little picture there, no line of sight. And it says there in the bubble there, it says only part of a soldier from this team is visible, which is not enough to shoot at. There's no real rule to state how much has to be visible. And that is why I created that aforementioned rule of 2. If you can see, by using your line of sight, what you see is what you get. If you can see 2 of anything in any team, 2 of the infantry, 2 of the stand corners, 2 treads, 2 wheels, whatever. If you can see 2, that makes that target a valid target. That kind of eliminates any sort of argument and debates that could constantly be going on about whether or not you're completely able to see it. And remember, before anybody starts getting argumentative about this game is a static game trying to reflect a fluid situation. So even if you might say, well, wait, I could probably see that guy even though not 2 things are showing. Well, remember, this is not a static game. These guys are moving back and forth. They're peeking their heads out and so on and so forth. By having a rule of 2, you're suggesting that most of that team has committed to not going ahead and being unseen. Oh, I just thought about Monty Python. The art of not being seen. Okay? Yes, if you have more than 2 things showing, you have committed that team to not hiding, to wanting to be seen, or to go ahead and, for lack of a better term, you made a perhaps error in your tactical judgment.
Okay, so what happens now if they're in terrain and they're considered concealed?
Yes, it's a very simple rule. It's very easy. Anything that can be seen with that rule of 2, if you want to use it, can be shot at. And now what the problem is what kind of cover do you have? Well, it doesn't matter for tanks. Your cover is generic. If you're behind a hedgerow, if you're behind a stone wall, or if you're partially covered by that building, whatever the case may be, your cover modifier is going to be the same no matter what. And that's fine. It simplifies the game. It kind of makes it a little bit easier to go ahead and get through and get the game played quickly. Infantry, it's a little bit more complicated because they can get bulletproof cover, which now makes you you need to have an armor save and so on and so forth. But that's for later. But needless to say, cover is very, very easy to go ahead and figure out. It's very easy to go ahead and use the rule, and it simplifies and quickens the game immensely.
So that's hills, concealment in aircrafts. You declare your target. Roll to hit. Here we go. So now we move to roll to hit. You can spot your target. You can shoot your target. Rolling to hit, like we said before, it's not so much the skill of the people being shot, it's the people being shot at that says is hit on, which I think is actually kind of fascinating.
Let me back things up just a slight here. When you're going to rotate the face on the previous page 32, that's an important step not to forget because unless your vehicle has a turret, you have to go ahead and rotate your unit to shoot at the guys you want to be able to shoot at, depending on their field of fire, which is usually forward field of fire. So, needless to say, it's important to do that because in the next phase, when the enemy gets to go ahead and move, they'll be able to use that against you, perhaps because you have turned and now you've exposed your rear armor or whatever the case may be to the enemy fire. So it's very important that you don't forget to rotate the face when you have declared your targets.
That's a good point. So we do our roll to hit. We put in some modifiers. If you're greater than 16 inches, it's a +1 to hit. And this time a +1 is actually bad. You don't want pluses, you want minuses to hit.
Yeah, it's pretty confusing, but once you get used to it, most of the modifiers are not applied to the roll, they're applied to the target number.
Right.
Now, before you get too far on here, you mentioned it before I interrupted you. The score needed to hit is very interesting because it's not based upon the skill of the fire, it's based upon the training and experience of the target.
Yes.
Because, and if you look at the chart that is now shown on the screen, the veterans are harder to hit because that's why they're veterans. They hide. They don't go out and risk their necks. They know where to find the cover and so on and so forth. Your conscripts are running around going, yay for the emperor. Oh, I'm sorry, no, that's for the kid. They're saying, yay for the Fuhrer and so on and so forth. And they're just running out there getting shot at, or they don't know, or they're too, not well trained enough, or, not smart enough to realize the cover. So I thought that was a very interesting nuance in the game.
Yeah, I thought that was very cool. Assigning the hits. 1, the shooter. The shooting player must assign the first hit against the targeting tank. The shooting player must assign the remaining hits evenly to tanks from the unit within 6 inches of the same team. For example, he assigns it, and then each hit has to be assigned evenly amongst the team. Unit.
Yes, the unit. This prevents pile-on. So, in order to just destroy that very heavy tank, I'm going to shoot like 6 guns at it. No, you can't do that. You have to distribute the hits evenly amongst the team for legal targets. Now, what's very interesting is you get to go ahead and try to pass the hit on if you really want to, which is the mistaken target rule, which is on the next page. To make a long story short, this makes it possible for the defender player to preserve either his heavy support that's attached to that unit, or perhaps to preserve his headquarters unit, or whatever the case may be. He is allowed, or she, let me make sure I'm perfectly okay with that because there's plenty of women who are joining the wargaming field nowadays, but they are able to go ahead and reassign the hits, one of the hits, if they score 3 or better. So it's a kind of interesting rule. But now here's where it gets very, very interesting. I cannot do the mistaken target and roll 3 or more if my units are too close together. Okay? So that's the problem. You can go ahead and get close to remain in command, but you can't get too close because then you can't reassign hits.
Yes, and then you determine if you're hitting the front or side armor on a turretless vehicle or on a turreted vehicle. If it's a turreted vehicle, you roll a d6 on a 4+, it hits the turret, which then you use the armor value of the turret on a 1 through 3, then hits the side, and you use the side armor's value. So that's actually a pretty big deal because the side armor is usually a lot less than the front armor. I'm
a little bit disappointed with that rule, to be honest with you. I 50% chance to hit a turret when you're going side on. I don't know. I think that's a little bit high. I mean, the most the tank is the tank. So, and I know they're probably figuring, if they're under cover, then you're not going to be trying to shoot through a wall or I don't know. I always thought it should be 5+, but that's just, again, my opinion.
Let's see. Then the vehicle gets a save. So
Yes,
they
the
roll a
armor save.
d6. I'm sorry, go
Yep,
on.
armor save is a very important part of this. It functions in two ways. First, I have to roll a d6, and then I add my armor value for whatever side I'm being hit upon, and I have to exceed the anti-tank value of my opponent's gun. If I do, bink, goes right off my armor or whatever the case may be, no damage. If I tie, there is a chance that my tank will bail out, according to their term, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
If you roll less than the anti tank value, your tank is either going to be destroyed or is going to bail out. It's a pretty bad thing if you roll less than the anti tank value during your save roll. And of course, there's modifiers to that depending on range, which reflects the velocity and impact of your weapon at range, or I should say, of your shell at range. But yeah, it's a pretty good system. It works out pretty smoothly once you get used to it.
Right, and if it does penetrate, then you have to make a blast check to see if it actually blows up.
Yes, that's your firepower check, and that's rated on the gun of the firing unit. And the firepower check will confirm whether or not the tank is just damaged, aka bailed out on a tie, or if you roll less than the anti-tank value, the the firepower will go ahead and determine if you just bail out or if your tank is outright destroyed.
All right, so if they do bail out, they're
Yep.
basically useless until they're able to bail back in.
That is correct. Now, the interesting way the game rules work, and I don't think we missed this because I thought we may have missed something on this, but I think it's the way it works, is that when it comes to because I'm being shot at, so my tanks bail out, but now it's going to be my turn. So
Mm-hmm.
before I do anything, I have a chance to remount my bailed out crews before anything happens. So in essence, I could go ahead and have a bailout result. Next turn is my turn, roll my remount, and guess what? Nothing effectively happened. My tank can now operate normally as if nothing had happened. It's an interesting rule. I'm still getting used to that concept. But again, when you think about the bailout concept, is not necessarily guys jumping out of their tanks and going, "Oh, mama, mama." You can assume that there's other things going on, and perhaps it was not nearly as bad damage. If you want to consider morale and Elan into this, maybe they were about to bail out and they looked around and said, "Oh wait, we're still alive. Get back in." Okay, there's all sorts of things to go ahead and consider with that remount roll. But it is an effectively cool nuance. And by the way, the reason why I know that the game has used the wrong term is because if you look at some of the data cards for the armored units, some of them have a bonus to remount that has nothing to do with morale or training. It has to do with the equipment itself. Like, for example, self-contained ammunition. That doesn't have anything to do with the morale or training of the crew. It has to do with the construction of the tank itself and whether or not it can take that kind of firepower. So that's something to consider if you're playing the game, just from the narrative standpoint, which is very important to me no matter what type of miniatures game I'm playing.
Yep, and if they bail out again and they fail their motivation roll, they're destroyed.
Yes,
Gone.
either the tank is damaged beyond repair immediately at the field, or the tank crew just runs away, or both.
All right, then we have our infantry saves. So if you're firing at the infantry, they basically roll their save. If they make it, they're alive. If not, dead.
Yep. And here's where the firepower rating comes in. And if you notice the bulletproof cover, we talked about that before. If you have bulletproof cover, like a stone wall or you're in a building, you have to make a firepower rating, even if the unit has failed its save, to go ahead and actually eliminate the unit because, hey, the bulletproof cover might have actually stopped some of the bullets. Go figure.
All right, so destroyed teams, killing commanders. These are all bad things. Pinned down units. They're basically pinned down. They can't do anything until they get back up again.
Well, no, they can do a few things. Basically, what they're unable to do is fire effectively. They have a reduced rate of fire, and they can no longer move towards the enemy.
Oh, that's right. They can only move away from the enemy.
Yes, they can move away from the enemy, which is important because it reflects not only, of course, the game, so you don't go ahead and just have your guys just getting shot up, in the middle of a crossfire. But also, realistically, if these guys are quote unquote pinned down, maybe they're just too scared to keep moving forward, and maybe they'll run back to cover.
All right, then we got firing smoke. We got your flamethrowers. A bunch of special rules for those. We've got snipers.
Smoke is very interesting. The smoke rules, you have two types of smoke. One that's from vehicles, and depending on infantry, they might, they're mortar crews or something. They can lay down smoke, but the smoke only acts as concealment and therefore only provides a modifier to hit. If your artillery fires a smoke barrage, it blankets that area with an impenetrable haze of smoke.
Aircraft is something we haven't quite played with yet.
No, and to be honest with you, aircraft work just about the same as other units. Of course, they aren't affected by terrain. They can move anywhere they want in the battlefield. I think they played a little loose and goose with how the rules work. I think there should be some sort of, maneuvering distance or whatever that they have to engage in. And maybe I didn't read the rules carefully enough, but you can't have a unit strafe and then turn on a dime and come back and strafe again. It's just not very realistic. But again, maybe I missed something in the movement section. But in essence, as anybody knows, when a aircraft strafes and attacks, it needs to kind of turn around and move around to make another run.
Okay, then we have artillery. So artillery was neat because you have to first spot and then you have to zero in. Yep. And you get 3 chances to roll, and each time you fail, you get progressively worse on your to-hit roll, if I remember correctly.
Yes, you get 3 chances to go ahead. First, you do your spotting round, and then you imagine your recon people or whatever saying 10 degrees north, 10 degrees, or whatever the case may be, and that's simulated by 3 different rolls, and you get 3 chances to do that, which represents your guns trying to train in, and if you don't get it by the 3rd one, you ran out of time for that particular turn. You can keep trying next time. But if you make your roll, depending on when you make a roll, it will depend on how much actual fire your artillery can go ahead and launch on that poor hapless unit that you fired upon, and that's why you have a modifier to hit in a negative sense if you've taken too much time to land your shots.
So then once they hit, you then basically do the same thing with the D6, add to your firepower, greater than or equal to the armor value.
Which, by the way, if you're firing a barrage at tanks, guess what? Their armor value is 1.
Because it is the top,
not
right?
necessarily always 1, yes. It's your top value, which is usually really bad. And by the way, another thing about artillery is it automatically pins any unit that was attacked by it. So it's a nice little way to keep your enemy in check.
Oh, smoke screens, that's kind of cool.
And don't forget that you can't fire within a certain distance from your own units. Or you can't fire an artillery barrage.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a part 1 for us. I think we're going to have to come back and do a part 2 next week because we are out of time. Guys, thank you for listening. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify Podcast. You can always email us at rulesexplained@gmail.com. I'm John Merritt.
I'm Rob Duffin.
Thank you for listening.
Adios.